I want to explain this again. Gosh, I got to use the word holistically, and I hate to use that word because I have bad memories of that word, dumb memories of that word. But holistically, we got to explain it. In the United States, we have a Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is the court of last resort. It's the final arbiter. There's only a very limited set of cases that are allowed to originate in the United States Supreme Court. And basically, it is when a state sues another state, those cases originate in the United States Supreme Court. And very often, what the Supreme Court does is then they pass the case off to a special master judge who hears those cases. Most famously are the water rights cases. Particularly, there's been an ongoing case between Florida, Georgia, and Alabama over the water rights off the Chattahoochee River as it flows down into Florida and out into Apalachicola. And there's been a massive issues, and that case originated in the Supreme Court. But pretty much every other case, 99% of cases, originate in district courts. Every state has district courts. The district courts, in some cases, states have just a single district, depending on size. But most courts have, at the federal trial court level, the district courts, they have multiple districts. For example, you might have a northern district, a middle district, a southern district. Most states are divided either by northern and southern designation or western and eastern. If there are big states, they might have Illinois, for example, has a central district. Oklahoma has a northern, a western, and an eastern. There are only 3 states that have 4 districts. North New York, Texas, and California. 3 states have 4 districts. The 3 big states, New York, Texas, and California. Now, here's what happens. If you go to a district court, I'm in the Middle District of Georgia. In fact, the courthouse, the federal courthouse, is a block from me in Macon, Georgia. I'm in the Macon branch, or Macon division of the Middle District of Georgia. There are 3 divisions in my district. So you have a Columbus, Georgia courthouse, you have a Macon, Georgia courthouse, and you have an Athens, Georgia courthouse. So in the Middle District of Georgia, the state's divided northern, middle, and southern. In the Middle District, there are actually 3 places where you can go file suit. You can file suit in Columbus, Georgia, Macon, Georgia, or Athens, Georgia. If a judge makes a ruling in the Middle District of Georgia, it binds the Middle District of Georgia. Does not affect the Northern District of Georgia, doesn't affect the Southern District of Georgia, doesn't affect Florida, doesn't affect Alabama, doesn't affect California, just my district, the Middle District of Georgia. However, federal judges within the Northern and Southern District of Georgia will pay attention to a case from a judge in the Middle District of Georgia, but it doesn't bind anybody else. Appellate-wise, the case is appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals for the Middle District of Georgia. There are 13 circuits in the United States. The circuits are all of the states that have district courts are within something called a circuit, and the circuits are groups of states. So, for example, the 11th Circuit handles Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. The 4th Circuit handles the Carolinas, Virginia, West Virginia, and Maryland. The 3rd Circuit handles Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware. So I have a case in the Middle District of Georgia. It gets appealed to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. The ruling for the 11th Circuit only applies to Georgia, Alabama, and Florida. Now, let's say, hypothetically, there are 2 cases. There's a case in the Western District of Texas. The Western District of Texas covers roughly parts of Austin, south of Dallas, all the way over to El Paso. It's a very big district. The case in the Western District of Texas gets appealed to the 5th Circuit, which covers Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas. Let's say the 5th Circuit decides differently the same sort of case from the 11th Circuit that covers Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. Well, The law in Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana would then be different than the law in Alabama, Georgia, and Florida. And that's where the Supreme Court comes in 99% of the cases, is the Fifth Circuit said the law is this, the 11th Circuit says the law is this. It goes to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court is the final arbiter that says, here's what the law is, and now that applies to everybody nationwide. Now, if you paid attention to what I was saying, and I realize it's a little bit complicated, if a judge issues an order in the Middle District of Georgia, or the Western District of Texas, or the Eastern District of California, that judge's order should only apply there. Increasingly, however, what happens is that a judge issues a nationwide injunction. So a judge in Macon, Georgia, in the Middle District of Georgia, can issue a court order that applies to everybody, everywhere, all at once. That's something the founders did not intend, and it's something the court system has never intended, but it is something that has increasingly happened in the last really 30 years. Predominantly, it has come from progressive judges. So very famously, during the first Trump administration, many cases were filed in the Northern District of California. The reason is because basically 100% of the judges in the Northern District of California are Democratic-appointed judges. And so you were guaranteed, no matter who got the case, a Democratic judge was going to hear the case, and that was going to be a progressive judge. Why? Because at the state level, the senators of states have inordinate amounts of say over who the president appoints. So in California, you have 2 Democratic senators. And under the rules of the Senate, they can blacklist, basically blue slip, any judge, they call it, blue slipping. So Donald Trump wants to appoint a radical right-winger to the Northern District of Georgia. California say, sorry, that person's unacceptable to our state. And the rest of the Senate, whether you or I like it, the rest of the Senate goes along with it. Why? Because they're, but by the grace of God, go their state. So the senators tend to agree that if the 2 senators of the state object, well, sorry. Now, this used to also apply to the courts of appeals. But Mitch McConnell refused back in the day when he was running the Senate to allow the 2 senators from California to block judges on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The Ninth Circuit is the most liberal of all the circuit courts. It covers Montana, Washington, Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, California, Arizona, Alaska, Hawaii, Guam, and the Marshall Islands. Yes, the Marshall Islands. We can't forget about them. The Ninth Circuit is massive, has a lot of seats, is headquartered in California, and has leaned liberal because you had the California and the Oregon and the Washington senators all objecting to conservative senators on the circuit. Well, Mitch McConnell, last time he was in charge of the Senate, said, screw that, we don't care. Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, Alaska, they want these people on the court. We're going to get them on the court. We're going to ignore your objection at the circuit level. And so the Ninth Circuit has shifted to the right now. The Ninth Circuit is now split, I think, 50-50 between liberals and conservatives. But the state courts are still a problem. And so what at the state level judges are doing is they're issuing nationwide injunctions saying, hey, you're not allowed to do this, Mr. President. Now, in fairness, Republicans do the same thing. In the Northern District of Texas, there is one federal judge in one federal courthouse that loves to issue nationwide injunctions on behalf of conservatives. Donald Trump has decided that this needs to be fought in the Supreme Court because though it helps conservatives when a Democrat is president to have a nationwide injunction, the reality is that it hurts all of us. One federal judge in one location should not be able to enjoin the actions of the President of the United States or corporations or individuals nationwide. So Trump, in the deportation orders and the firing of federal worker orders, is setting up a constitutional fight with federal judges. Because in the Northern District of California, a federal judge has ruled Donald Trump has to rehire all probationary workers nationwide and took the extraordinary step of saying, I'm going to apply my order to the whole nation, even though I'm only in San Francisco, California. Trump is spoiling for the fight. It's a necessary fight to have. We need to fight this fight. Donald Trump ignoring federal judges when there are clear, by the way, very clear standards in place that the Supreme Court has made on deportations in the past. And some of these progressive judges are now just ignoring previous Supreme Court ruling, daring Donald Trump to challenge them. Guess what? He's challenging them. He's ignoring them. He's saying, sorry, these people are already out of the country. Too late for me to do anything about it. This is a necessary fight. And it's actually one, whether you're progressive or conservative, this benefits you. Why? Because if you're progressive and you control the White House, you don't want a single conservative judge in Texas saying, I'm sorry, you're blocked on everything. This happened on transgender issues. It's happened on environmental issues, all these things. Now, if you're conservative, you say, whoa, then maybe I like nationwide injunctions. You shouldn't, because you as a conservative should appreciate that a judge must be bound to a geographic territory. And a judge in the Northern District of Texas should not be able to bind the people in California any more than a judge in the Northern District of California should be able to bind the people of Texas. And the Trump administration has decided this is a fight worth having, and it is. It is a fight worth having. And so they have decided not to, quote unquote, ignore a federal judge. They just dragged their feet on following what the judge wanted, and it was too late to get anything done. They have decided to ignore the federal judge in San Francisco saying that the president has to control offices in Washington, D.C. in a certain way because the judge in San Francisco has no power over Washington, D.C. And this will get to the Supreme Court. The only way it doesn't get to the Supreme Court is if the circuit courts of the United States all agree that nationwide injunctions by district court judges are verboten, prohibited, not allowed. Amy Coney Barrett, Sam Alito, Clarence Thomas, and Neil Gorsuch, and I think even Brett Kavanaugh, that's 5 justices of the Supreme Court, have all said nationwide injunctions by district court judges have gotten out of hand and they need to be reined in. And now, thanks to the progressive judges who could not help themselves, Donald Trump has multiple cases to take to the Supreme Court so that those 5 justices, all of whom who have previously expressed their concerns about nationwide injunctions, can block them, and we'll all be better off. Simply stated, a judge in your state at the federal level should not be able to control the actions of the people in my state and vice versa. That's not the way the founders intended the system to work. That's not the way the courts were structured. That's not the way the Supreme Court has intended it to work. And yet the federal district court judges have decided to operate as kings. It's not Donald Trump who's created the constitutional crisis. It's the federal judges. And this applies left, right, and center. You should not be able to issue nationwide injunctions as a federal district court judge. And Donald Trump has decided it's time to have this fight, and it absolutely is.